how's your day been?
It's good. It's good. So it's like the daily crazies of running a business and all the fires to put out.
Oh yeah. Well, this conversation is going to be very, very fluid, and we can just dive right in.
Yeah,
Um,
sounds good.
but anything on your mind today on the busy day?
Oh, there's so much on my mind.
Yeah, let's talk.
I think if we zoom way out, there's a lot of conversations happening around how do we approach the CCC? How do we as an industry organize and get on the same page so we're representing a unified front? How do we fix some of the problems where stakeholders disagree on the approaches with commissioner turnover and CCC staffing turnover? There's a lot of turmoil in the industry right now, and so there are constant conversations happening in the background of my everyday around what power do we have as an industry, as the licensees, to do something about it so that our businesses can survive. And I am actually optimistic that we are seeing change will come, we're moving in the right direction, but it's just a matter of, can it happen fast enough that our businesses will survive to see the day? And every day those conversations are happening. So I'm working on two levels. I've got the
Mhm.
daily struggles of actually running a business and keeping my team motivated and making sure we're being efficient and delivering a great service to our clients. And then also this existential threat of the industry in the background that, has actually been a nice coming together of the community of people who are really working together to strategize for our own survival. And I've been really appreciative of that community too. So there's a lot. My mind is swirling all the time.
I'm really happy you joined me today, Megan. Thank you for making the time. Not only I would say that you are a leader in the cannabis testing space and the head of SafeTiva Labs, um, but in an industry where integrity of testing is often called into question. I think
Hmm.
you and your team are committed at maintaining a fairly high ethical standard. And
Hmm.
today, I would love to dive into the science-based testing protocols that you guys go about.
Yeah.
You work with scientists, right? You did to say that's the core of your team. But the ethical challenges that you guys face as a lab in the environment today, and the future of the cannabis industry, which,
Hmm.
if I'm getting what you told me just now, that basically is like everything that's on your mind, right? Like all
Yeah.
the balls are right. So
Yeah.
yeah, what does Safety Labs do? Like what does Zoom the company? Who are you and what do you do?
Oh, great. Well, I guess I'll start with also acknowledging the third party that's a part of the industry, which are the consumers. And I view our job as protecting them and making sure that the products that they're buying in dispensaries are labeled accurately so that they can dose properly and that they can trust the safety of those products. Otherwise, why pay the high prices and high taxes at a dispensary, right? I really feel like the testing is what makes a difference in a legal market. So SafeTiva Labs was founded. We started in 2020, and really was founded on the idea of building a showcase laboratory that would always wear the white hat, that would always put ethics first, that would deliver an excellent, reliable, fast service to our clients so that they got the data that they could trust, which always informs their practices to create better products, right? Putting better flower, better manufactured products on the shelves is really dependent on having accurate real-time data to inform your practices. Um, and that we would never ever compromise on our ethics. And I was really lucky to find an investor who believed in that mission as well, who has always said we put ethics first above the bottom line. We cannot be in this industry if we're going to compromise on our values for the bottom line. We're just never going to do that. And I was so fortunate to find someone who was really well aligned on that mission. And it's a message that we give to all of our employees from the time we're interviewing them as potential candidates to our weekly lab meetings, where we are always identifying ways where we can improve the accuracy of our data and not succumb to the pressures of the industry and our clients, who we really are rooting for and want to succeed, but it has to be on ethical terms. So it's been a core part of our mission since the beginning, and we're really grateful that we have the luxury of waiting out the industry to catch up and not have to compromise on those values. So I'm a molecular biologist by background. I went to Caltech for my PhD in molecular biology, where I was focusing on bacteria and viruses and how they interact with human cells, mostly using really cool, powerful microscopes. But I always wanted to teach. And so after my PhD, I was on the faculty at Hampshire College teaching undergraduates biology in wide-ranging topics. And then I was there for 7 years and I got tenure. And then it sort of became financially unsustainable in academia for the college to really survive in its current structure. So I started looking for other things. And that was when a group that I knew from Burning Man, from my California days, reached out and said, hey, you should look at cannabis testing. And at that point, there were only 2 labs in the state, and turnaround times were 8 weeks long. And I spent a year studying the market and how labs were doing things and the regulations, and felt like I could do it better. And I took a giant leap of faith and left my tenured faculty position to start a business.
Right.
Yeah.
I have a quote that I'm going to send you, or maybe I think I already sent it to you. It's like, we did this because we thought this was easy.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Got it.
I hear so often from my cultivator friends and clients where they were like, I came to this industry because they told me I would just be growing weed. There's so many people who just love weed, who love the plant and the process of creating their products that they're really proud of, and wish that they could just focus on that.
Right.
Yeah, it's been a long journey.
What drew you into the world of science, and how would you say that passion has evolved as you've moved into the cannabis industry?
Wow, that's a big question, Harsh. I'd say it's a deep curiosity and yearning for knowledge. I'm really uncomfortable with unanswered questions. And I'm also a very hands-on person. And so knowing that I really wanted to teach, I always found those classes in school to be the most fun, where you get to really be hands-on and explore the world and figure out ways to answer questions that you had. And I think the PhD was really good training in learning how to think and learning how to be resourceful and how to systematically answer questions, and especially try to tear apart the answers that others were giving, and really being critical and questioning data a lot. And that has helped me in weeding through the misinformation online and all of the well accepted notions in whatever industry I am. I was really taught to question everything. So I found that to be really helpful, and I don't know, I just find it really fun. I just love it. I love it to my core. It's endlessly fascinating to me. And I also really appreciate being able to communicate science to people who feel like science is inaccessible to them, or they hear science or math and they just run away screaming. And I really, the most fun parts to me in being a professor and in being a scientist are trying to pull people in and realize how much science can really benefit them. Actually, after this, I have a call with one of my former students who hated science, never thought she could do it, and now she's a professional scientist, and we're just calling to check in, and I love that stuff. So that's really rewarding to me.
getting trained as a scientist essentially, and then hopping into business, would you
Mm,
say there were some overlaps between
yes.
training uh,
Yes.
and what were the gaps that you kind of, I guess, found out, and then, developed your own
Yeah.
protocol? Yeah.
Yeah, good question. For me, I thought that academia and entrepreneurship were completely aligned. The overlap was almost identical for me.
Mm.
Um, in academia, you have to build a research program, and you have to think of interesting questions that actually contribute meaningfully to society that no one else has done before. So you really have to figure out what differentiates you. You have to convince others that it's a good idea, raise money, recruit staff or students, train them. It's effective project management. And then in all of the analysis and conclusions, being able to communicate that to the rest of the world effectively. And gosh, that was so instrumental. Those skills in building a business and in going through the PhD of just the grit and you do whatever it takes and you figure it out. And while everyone else is saying, I could never do that, we have to ask more often, well, why not me? Why couldn't I do that? And just do it. And there were a lot of skills that I thought were completely overlapping in both worlds.
So,
I think to complete your question, I think that the one thing that really has been a gap for me is the cannabis aspect and the industry part of cannabis and learning the CCC and the process of cultivation and manufacturing. I had no experience with that before, and so the cannabis science part was new for me.
got it. So I would love to talk to you a little bit more about the cannabis science part, but just at a high level, right? How does the sample get tested? Like, what's the actual process for anyone that has, they see the TAC results, they see the sticker, right? Whenever the certificate of analysis are given, they never see all that stuff. They just see the breakdown on the back.
Yeah.
How would you explain the process of how that goes from a cultivator to a sticker on the back and a completely finished product? What
Right.
does that process look like?
Okay. So we test for both home growers and commercial clients, but if we're focusing on the commercial clients, the testing is a state requirement, so they have to use a lab. And when they engage with us, we go pick up the sample typically. We bring it back to our facility, and then we have to log it, take pictures of it, put it all in metrics. So the seed to sale tracking system that the state is aware of everything that we are in possession of. And then from there, depending on what tests have been ordered, we are preparing the samples with our team of technicians to homogenize the samples. So we mix it all together and make sure that any sample we pull from the testing sample is going to be representative of the whole. And
How do
then
you?
how do we homogenize? It really depends on what if it's a liquid, if it's flour, it has to be ground up typically if it's flour or an edible or something. So just grinding it into really fine powder, and then making sure that it's really mixed well from there. And each lab has a different technique for what kind of technology they're using to grind it up, but the end result is always the same, that it should be a fine powder or a well mixed liquid. And then from there, we're extracting from those original raw samples. We're adding solvents and chemicals. We're doing cleanup steps, so that what actually goes on our instruments are the purified or as close as we can versions of what the original sample was. So if we're looking for cannabinoids, we're trying to get as much of the other stuff out of the sample so that what remains is mostly cannabinoids. Um, and that includes a lot of dilution steps and cleaning it up because we don't want them to clog our instruments either. So they have to be pretty purified samples when they're going through the instrument. And then we have chemists and analysts who are running the instruments and doing the data analysis. I think a lot of people think that you just put a sample on an instrument and it spits out a number. That's not at all how it is.
Mhm.
What we get are graphs, and we have to interpret those graphs, and it will have a lot of peaks on it. And our analysts have to go through and make sure that they're properly identifying what those peaks are. There are a lot of quality checks. We run blanks, we run positive controls, we run surrogates where we'll take something through with the sample and make sure that what we put in at the beginning comes out at the end. And there are all kinds of checks on the process that our quality team is checking for to make sure that the data are valid at the end of the process. Yeah, so I'll stop there because I'm probably making anyone glaze over about, like, oh God, this is so technical.
No, I think
Um,
people, but here's the thing. I think some people are very interested in the technical, right? Where, they're trying to understand because it's picking up weed from, your homeboy that's slinging some gear in his car and it's get into my passenger seat, here's my bag, pick something out
yeah,
versus an entire industry, right? And an entire analytical laboratory that has, very capable, equipment that yeah, so it's a very big
yeah,
reality shift between the consumer
yeah,
mindset, and because people don't see inside of a laboratory and see what's going on, these details are really missing in telling the cannabis story. And so I think the more details that you can give, including, I mean, we'll talk about a little bit like the plate testing and stuff, but more details you
mhm.
can give, the better,
Okay,
because I think that's the missing piece
yeah,
in in the consumer's mindset. That's
yeah.
yeah,
Okay. Well, I think the other aspect of the lab process that not everyone understands is how detailed we have to be in the documentation of everything. And just
yeah.
traceability is a key concept in an analytical testing lab.
Tell
So
me about
that if someone pulls out a sample from 2 years ago, we need to be able to say how it was homogenized, which analyst did it, what was the temperature in the room when it happened, which solution was used, who made it, which pipette was used, when was it calibrated, what were all the quality checks, what does the raw data look like, who put the data into our lab information management system, who approved that data. Every single step that we do, every detail is recorded, and then we get audited regularly. So we have to have ISO 17025 accreditation, and they come in and they check. They'll pull out a random sample and they'll say, tell me which pipette was used, show me the calibration certificate on that pipette, show me which analyst did the work, show me their training records that showed that they were properly trained and had demonstrated competency in doing that, right? So it's there's so much more that we put effort into besides just testing samples. There's the whole quality realm around it too, which is an intensive part.
Got it. And when you're talking about a pipette, you're not talking about one of those plastic ones, right? Like the ones that you
Yeah,
a
no.
fountain pack. Right. This is
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, it's really dialed in, very precise, very accurate. They have to be calibrated every year by a third party.
Hmm.
Um, and syringes too. We use really fine glass syringes and volumetric glassware, and every instrument has to be calibrated and properly maintained, and those records have to exist. So, yeah, it's a big operation.
Right. Well, let's dive into the big operation. When you think about your role as a scientist in the cannabis space, how do you balance the purity of scientific, ethics and discovery and pushing the agenda forward on the testing side and reconcile that with the pressures of the market?
Hmm. It is the gray zone for the entire industry right now, where every lab exists and has to figure out for themselves where they fall in a space where the regulations are completely silent on what we are supposed to do. or how we are supposed to react in certain situations. And again, ethics always has to come first, and it's a conversation our team has. But our clients are working within a regulatory landscape where everything is vague and no one knows what are we supposed to do, right? There are very vague guidelines, and
Example of a vague guideline.
oh, sure.
Yep.
Yeah. The regulations are completely silent about whether producers can submit the same samples to multiple labs, whether they can cherry pick results, whether they can cherry pick samples, whether they can mark samples that they're sending to a lab to specify which tests they're for. So instead of sending us a 6-gram package, can they send us 1 gram that's labeled for potency, 1 gram that's labeled for microbial testing? Can they do that to different labs? Can they do that to the same lab? The regulations are silent about whether the lab samples can go through any kind of kill step or remediation before they get to a lab. And there is a protocol that is the guidance for sampling, but when I ask my clients, most of them don't know it exists. And if they know it exists, they don't realize that it's part of the regulation. They think it's a guidance document that's like a suggested protocol. And so clients ask all the time, can they put the keef that was, in the trimming process, all the keef that falls out, can they put that back into the sample? The regulations are completely silent about pre-rolls. Pre-rolls weren't a thing when the regulations were written. So whether they're infused or not, when is it considered a final product? Because final products have to get tested. So if the flower was tested as a final product, but then it gets rolled, or does it need to be tested again? No, the regulations don't tell us anything. How labs should homogenize the samples. For vitamin E acetate, there's absolutely no guidance about what the limits are and how low we need to be able to detect down to. It just says not detected, but we need some guidance about how low are we supposed to detect down to. A big one is if labs run a sample multiple times, which data do they use? Do they take the average of 3 runs? Do they take the best of 3 runs? Are they only allowed to run it 1 time and any reruns have to go through metric? It's like every day when we ask, especially in our first year when we were just figuring things out, there were so many questions that we had, and I'll try not to get too negative about the experiences of trying to find those answers, but ultimately the regulations just need to be really clear. I think labs have done a fairly good job of communicating with each other about what are you guys doing? What are we supposed to be doing? But I haven't had a great experience in reaching out to the CCC for clarification, because if the regulations aren't clear, they can't give me guidance about it.
Right. What do you think the disconnect is between the CCC and the I hear everything from, on our end, cultivation to let's go up the supply chain, right? Retailer, delivery drivers, testing laboratories, cultivators, manufacturers. Everybody has something to say about the CCC. Where do you or why do you think there is a disconnect? What could be the reason? We're just trying to untangle the situation, right? But what are your personal thoughts?
Yeah, I think there has historically been a lack of leadership. I think that the staffing turnover is too fast. I think the regulations themselves at the beginning were written in a time and place, and the industry has changed so much, and the CCC just hasn't been able to keep up with it fast enough for how quickly the industry changes. I'd really like to see them get out to labs and other facilities more often and understand what their daily life is like. But most importantly, I think the biggest shift would happen if the CCC staff and the investigators viewed us as collaborators and not in opposition, because I'm afraid to ask them questions. I know other labs are afraid to ask them questions to get clarity, um, because there's this mentality of getting in trouble, or you keep your mouth shut, you don't say anything, you have as minimal interaction as possible. I do think it's getting better. They've hired more science staff who, when they come, they ask good questions. They have been um, understanding of what it takes to run a lab. Many of them come from other labs, so they have seen it. So I will add a little bit of optimism that it is getting better. But I am still to this day finding a feeling of, when I interact with them, a fear of getting in trouble or being viewed as like they're always trying to catch us doing something wrong. And I've been really vocal and upfront about, we want to do the right thing, and if we're not doing the right thing, we want to know about it. So please come inspect us, please tell me where we could do better, because we always strive to be continually improving. I really truly do welcome that feedback from them, but I don't want to be treated like a criminal. I don't want to be constantly viewed as someone who must be doing something wrong if they could just catch me, and it's been truly, there's been a lot of tension in the industry between the CCC and licensees. And for labs especially, we're playing this dual role of being licensees and going through that process with all of the other producers and delivery operators and retailers. We're in those categories too, but we also play this sort of regulatory role where we have to uphold these vague regulations and make sure that the consumer is staying safe. And that's really what I really care about. I've got two kids who I hope will be able to enjoy cannabis when they're older too. But I want to make sure that they know what they're consuming. So I'm viewing my role as a mom, as a mom to all consumers. So it's tough. I feel like that was a really long-winded, inarticulate answer to your question, but I think
I
it's
think
really the mindset.
I think you nailed it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned something about asking meaningful questions as a scientist. What meaningful question is SafeTiva asking in the cannabis industry?
Well, I think it's in service to what questions our clients are asking.
Okay.
Our clients need the data. Our clients need to know what it is they're buying when they buy wholesale. They need to know what's going into their processes, especially for manufacturing. They need data all along the way to be alerted to any issues before they become failures. So we're really a partner in our clients being able to get the best possible products on the shelves. So that's our main job. That's the core of what we do. And then internally, we are always asking questions. In fact, we have a person who is entirely dedicated to just doing R&D and method development for what are the best practices out there for cannabis testing specifically. And we're learning, the industry globally is learning more and more. Every month there are new academic papers with best practices that come out. There are great conferences with spreading of new ideas. New technologies are getting invented specifically for the cannabis testing world. So we need to make sure that we're staying ahead of that, and embracing the technologies that are out there, so that we're as accurate as possible. And then, there are R&D projects that clients have, or that third-party research institutions have, that we engage with. One example is, what does remediation really do to the buds?
Yeah.
Does it
Please,
really impact?
please do. Yeah. Or what is remediation? A lot of people don't even realize their cannabis is remediated, right?
Yeah.
What is remediation, and what does it do to the bud, and
Right.
why people remediate?
Right. Right. Is it safe for employees? Is it safe for consumers? How does it impact quality? How does it impact shelf life? Is it really killing the microbes that it's intended to do? What does it do to mycotoxins? There are so many questions that I think are unanswered, at least from an unbiased perspective, that I'd really like to know the answers to, because especially in Massachusetts, with the microbial limits being as low as they are, remediation is being used in I would say a majority of facilities.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. It's I've never seen a complete data set about that, but um, the Certified Remediation Free project has been systematically trying to promote this their seal on the packaging for organizations that don't use remediation, and they're finding that most producers that they talk to are not qualified to do the program. So I think I can only speak to Massachusetts, but I do think remediation is happening a lot, and a lot more than what is captured in metric. And we just don't know what effects that has. And I want to make it clear, I'm not anti-remediation. At this time, I am a completely neutral third party who just has an interesting scientific question. So I think those are the places where we need to go when we're talking about maturing our industry.
And when you're talking about remediation, just so for layman's, this is killing the microbials in the cannabis, right? So this
Yeah.
is where it was any type of mold or any type of, bacteria, or anything. This is essentially
Yeah.
sanitizing, right?
Yeah. Any kill step. I mean any kill step where typically when the harvest has already happened and there is some kill step in between live plants to packaged product, right? Research wise, I think everyone is pretty focused on the rad source and the ozone boxes and things like that. So that's the research question piece. But I think remediation is happening in a lot of uh, smaller scale ways as well, from facility to facility, when they just need to pass testing. And everyone's doing the best they can to keep their businesses alive within what the regulations allow. And so I totally get it, and I want to reiterate that I'm neutral on the issue of remediation, but if I were looking through a lens of making sure that the safest products get to consumers, I am definitely seeing evidence from a testing perspective that the testing samples are passing through the regulations so that the entire batch can go on the shelf, but that testing sample is not representative of that whole batch that gets to the shelf. So something was done to the sample, like it was adulterated in some way to make sure that it would pass testing, that the whole batch didn't get exposed to. And there are so many loopholes, and I think a big part of it is in the sampling, but I have a lot of evidence about ways that testing samples are yeah, I guess adulterated is the best word.
So
So
how is it supposed to be done ideally, and how are people doing it to, you know, um, get
yeah.
past testing? Like
Okay.
yeah, walk me through the regular process and then the adulterated process.
Okay, so what's supposed to happen according to the protocol for sampling put out by the CCC is that, and we'll just start with flower. They're supposed to dump all the buds out on a table that's labeled in a quadrant, and then they're supposed to pick samples under a camera. So it's supposed to be a documented process on camera where they're picking samples from each quadrant, And it should be blind. They should be wearing gloves and making sure they're being really sanitary about it. But they should not be picking the biggest, most beautiful buds. They should just be reaching their hand into a pile, picking it and putting it in a sterile container, and then mixing 4 samples from the quadrants after the flower's been all mixed on a table.
Hmm.
Um, I can only think of 1 or 2 clients who are testing their flower with us who I know are doing that process. And I think most people don't even know that that's supposed to be the requirement. Um, yeah. And then it's supposed to go like so it's in the sterile container, and then it goes straight to the testing lab with no other treatments whatsoever. It's all in one container, it's all mixed together. That gets closed and sealed and off to the lab with no other tampering. So,
Hmm.
um, so what can happen is, even if it's on camera and they do spread it out over a table and they're sampling in the quadrants, that they can be cherry picking samples. They can take a sample over to a microwave and microwave it. They can
Um,
bleach it.
like an actual microwave,
Yeah,
really.
like an actual microwave. I mean, yeah, and I don't want to demonize anybody too, because the regulations are really harsh, and the it, business owners are not set up to succeed here. So I get it,
Mm.
and I also want to make sure that consumers are safe.
You
So
also said
I
bleach, Megan. So microwave and bleach.
Yeah,
That sounds pretty, pretty harsh.
yeah. And that's just it's just the testing sample, right? They're not treating the whole batch that gets sold to retailers. And so I know it happens because of the questions I get from clients. I also know it happens because if a micro failure happens where the numbers were off the charts, they get one retest and we'll retest it and everything comes back at 0. And that just can't happen naturally. So something happened in between there. Um,
There was what is it? There was some type of like outside, like cosmic push that
yeah,
definitely that
right,
definitely made
right.
some
Right.
modification.
Yeah. And perhaps in the first poll, someone pulled it who had gone to the bathroom and didn't wash their hands, or maybe some contamination event happened with that first sample, but we see zeros across the board too often for the technology that we have that we know is very accurate. And we use both PCR and plating, and they have to agree. And so zeros across
So
the board.
what is PCR and what is plating? If you could
Oh yeah.
explain and yep.
Yeah, sure. So the PCR is the DNA method. So it's polymerase chain reaction. We are isolating, purifying the DNA from the sample, and then we're amplifying certain sections of that DNA to look for the species that are targets on the list. Those get amplified in a thermal cycler, and then with our technology, they then get tagged with a fluorophore, so like a fluorescent photon is released when there's a binding event happening. And so we're measuring in a microarray detector the amount of fluorescence that is emitted in a binding effect. So it's a high-tech molecular DNA method. PCR is used in so many other industries, and everyone became really familiar with it when we were all COVID testing. PCR was like the gold standard, and it's not without its flaws, but it can be a very specific test where you're looking for very specific DNA. And then plating is the very simple, very old method of you have a media on a plate and you put the sample on there and you put it in an incubator and you watch and see what grows over the next 2 days or so. Um, And so if those two methods agree, then you have and there's really good agreement, like the numbers are spot on between them, then you can be very confident. However, most of the time, well, I wouldn't say most of the time, but in certain circumstances, the two technologies will not agree. And that's when there's a lot of the gray area, and what does a lab do then? Another area where the regulations are completely silent about what we're supposed to do. And so cultivators will typically have their mindset on which technology they've had better luck with, and they will choose a lab based on what technology they use. It's one of the first questions we get when a client is interviewing us to potentially switch labs.
PCR or plate test, right?
Do you do PCR or plating?
Yeah.
And so we've had to say we do both because we don't want to lose clients over the technology. But they have pros and cons, and anyone who says that one is better than the other has an agenda. There are pros and cons, and in different circumstances, one technology is better than the other for sure. And you just have to have really well-trained scientists to know the difference and know how to run them and what to look for. It's not a set it and forget it kind of thing. It's an active, you need microbiologists and molecular biologists who really know what they're doing. There's one platform out there that they claim to be so easy a chemist can do it. And the idea is that it's supposed to be you put it in and you wait a couple days and then you get results. And that's not what we do at SafeTiva. It's a very active hands-on process.
Got it. I can imagine the marketing behind that. Can you, and coming up with that quip saying it's so easy a chemist can do it, right? Like it's a very niche thing to target, like just specific scientists, right? Like that's like, well,
Right.
me, I only got it because of the context clues that you gave, right? But like, if I would have seen that marketing ploy, right, it would have been like, I wonder. Okay.
Yeah, I think it mostly applies to analytical testing labs because 90% of the staff are going to be chemists, and that's
Right.
really the bulk of what we do. And in many labs, the biology piece is an afterthought. It's like, oh yeah, and we're all chemists, but we have to figure out this biology thing. And so labs really need to employ experienced biologists, both microbiologists and molecular biologists, to be able to get to the accurate results.
Got it. So speaking of, the essentially labs in general, when you hear the term lab shopping, what is your first emotional reaction to that? Just that for me, for example, it's been I'm going to share an article with you in just a bit, but it's basically talking about how people are essentially lab shopping, right, in the entire state of Massachusetts. I guess how does it shape your leadership and decision making over at SafeTiva Labs when you hear that?
Yeah. From a lab perspective, and if I put on my public health hat, lab shopping is a very negative aspect of our industry nationwide, and it's a really dishonest part of the industry, and I think it's stunting the growth of where we can go. I think the root cause is vague regulations. Vague regulations mean that labs have to interpret stuff for themselves, and if they're interpreting, that causes variability. Variability means someone could send out 6 samples to 6 different labs and get wildly different results, and they're going to do what's best for their company and choose the results that are probably going to fetch more money in the short term. I'm hoping that we're seeing more consumer demand for accurate labels and transparent companies that are really focused on good end user experience and not just selling wholesale for the highest price possible in the short term, long-term reputation be damned. I think the companies that are thinking about the consumer experience are probably not lab shopping. They've got a lab that they trust, that's reliable, that gives them accurate data that makes sense to their processes. And I think that the consumers can tell the difference, and those companies are going to survive longer in the long run. Um, as a When I'm putting myself in the shoes of the business operators, the cultivators, the manufacturers, I get it. This industry is so hard to make any money, and gone are the days where people are becoming instant millionaires. There's no money around, and so they're doing whatever they can to survive, and I get that. And so I do want to have some compassion for all sides of the industry too. But we need to end lab shopping, and that's going to mean clarifying regulations. It's going to mean having more oversight and giving labs more guidance, restricting labs to what technologies they can use, how they are analyzing data, how they're reporting data. It's going to mean restricting how the sampling process can happen. But we really need to go in that direction in order for our industry to become mainstream.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's, these are all very hard things to do. Very
Yeah.
hard, right? I think the onerous has to start from the agency, right? The CCC. And then because if they're not taking it seriously, then there's not, yeah. So one of two things, I have a theory, which is, Megan, either they need to take charge, or there needs to be a small coalition that rallies all the operators and takes the agenda to them.
Mhm.
And so, um, I I operate from a belief that the change starts with you, or at least the change starts with me whenever I want to see any change in my life, or anything. Um, but as far as the industry is concerned, um, is there a moment in your career where you were tempted to compromise but chose not to? Um, and what did you overall learn from that experience?
Mhm. I think the number one scenario that we see are when clients are so desperate, they're in tears, and they're looking to me to help save them and their business. And everyone has a really sad story about, I've
Hmm.
put my whole life savings into this. I owe my family and friends money. If I can just get this one batch out, then then I'll have the money to pay my rent and survive another day. And that power lies with me to really help somebody else, but it's at the
Hmm.
expense of consumer safety, and also jeopardizes my own license. So that's typically the conversations with clients around what are your options, and to make sure that they know that they have options. And if it's a flower batch, that there are remediation options, there are extraction options. And those are going to hurt the bottom line a bit, but it means that they can save the batch and keep their integrity intact, because a lot of these business owners, they don't want to cheat the system, they don't want to cheat their
Hmm.
consumers. They're proud of the product that they're creating. They've really poured their sweat and tears into making something that they want to be proud of. So they don't want to be cutting corners. And so to be able to talk them through, here are your options, here's what the regulations say. I cannot cross this boundary with you, but um, you know, I can help you understand what other clients do in a similar situation. So those are really tough. Those are the phone calls I dread the most.
Right.
Or, when someone is in my lobby or in my office and they're just a pile of tears. Those are the hardest moments for me in being in a really hard place.
Right. Hmm. So, in regards to, you were saying helping the entrepreneur at the expense of the consumer, right? Let's talk about the consumer a little bit. what do you what does the consumer not understand about the products that they are buying on the shelf?
Um, I don't think they understand that what's on the label is only representative of what was sent to the testing lab, and that testing labs can only test what we're given. We don't do the sampling. That the label is representative of a moment in time, that it's an organic plant material, and that microbes continue to grow over the next year that that certificate of analysis is good for. That potency will degrade, or there will be changes to the cannabinoids, conversions happen over time. And
Mhm.
so it's a snapshot in time, and there are no shelf life stability requirements in Massachusetts besides the COA is good for a year and then it needs to be retested. But also, I want them to know that most labs, I think, are doing a good job at what they do. I don't think there are as many fraudulent labs as people think there are. I don't think labs are intentionally trying to defraud the or to try to create fraudulent results for consumers. I'm meeting the scientists in labs, and I see the scientists in our own lab, and they care a lot about doing a good job and putting out good data. They care a lot and are really well trained and go through a lot of training even after entering the lab. And so I'm trying to put send everyone in a positive direction. I certainly trust products that are in a dispensary more than something my buddy who grew in his basement gave me, or something that I would buy from someone walking up and down an aisle at a festival. I still do trust dispensary products more, but there are a lot of changes that need to be made.
Got it. So, going back to the discrepancies you were saying that sometimes they'll send like multiple samples out to different laboratories. When it comes to the discrepancy between the labs, especially in failure rates, how much of that can you attribute to human error versus system limitations? And again, I'm only giving two options because I am I'm choosing not to say, well, they meant to do this, right? It could have been,
Mm,
but there is
yeah.
a third option as well, saying, hey, that is their agenda and this is their MO.
Yeah. Okay. So give me the two options again.
Well, the two options are how much of it do you think it's due to human error or bias, and how much it is a reflection of the limitations of the systems and technologies in place at that laboratory for the
Yeah.
variations in failure rates.
Yeah. I think it's mostly the variations in technologies, different
Mhm.
interpretations of regulations. And remember, it's the people who are leading the labs who are making any decisions about how how we're going to interpret regulations and what the practices of the lab are going to be. And it's the analysts and the technicians, they're following protocols. They're doing the best they can to always do the same thing every time. They're accountable to the data, but they're not deciding how we're reporting things. In our lab, our technicians and analysts do have a lot of a lot of leeway to do the right thing. They are given a lot of they're accountable to the data, and we have discussions all the time about what's the right thing to do here. But in bigger labs, the technicians have um, no visibility on the COAs that actually go out to clients. There's a big disconnect. But to answer your question directly, I don't think it's a lot of human error or bias. I think it's a lot of differences in technology and protocol.
Okay. Well, in looking at an ideal, well, I always, frame it as what is the perfect business that you would operate? What is the perfect team that you would have? What is the perfect testing standard or the ideal testing standard that
Yeah.
you think, should be put out?
Yeah. It would be based on good science, good reference data, good studies. So it would have to be based on good science to start with. And then it
Okay.
would be so tight in the language that there is no room for interpretation. So I don't know how specific you want me to get, but I really
Let's get
I
down
want
to the, like very, yeah, the more details, the better.
I want the CCC to tell me, um, here's how you handle a sample from the second it walks in the door. Here's how you homogenize it. Here's how you extract it. Here's the instrumentation you use. Here are the settings you use. I want them to tell me everything. But I want it to be based on, so I want someone who knows what they're doing to set those limitations. And then how we report things. What are the parameters that we're using? Um, I don't want to have to guess on anything. And we need to be able to pass, we should be able to get any reference material or proficiency tests. You can buy these blind samples and run them in your lab, and then show that you got the same results as a third party or whoever the manufacturer of that product is. Everyone should have regular proficiency testing that is monitored by the CCC. Um, yeah, I want no interpretation on the part of the labs in this industry. You know, no one goes to get blood work done and they get their results and they're like, nah, I don't buy that my blood sugar is that high. I'm going to go to a different lab. Right? Everyone just trusts the lab because there are standards, there are standard operating procedures, there are best practices, there are our ISO accreditation has us following really specific protocols. I just, as a scientist, I want it to be really black and white what every lab is doing. I don't want there to be a state standards lab or a reference lab. I don't think that would be worth spending the money on doing, because I think that the CCC can do a lot before we get to that point in standardizing the labs, in doing blind testing across labs to make sure that we're all within a tight grouping with results. Off the shelf testing, I think, has a lot of pitfalls that we need to be careful about, but
Right.
the CCC could be doing some more of that. Internally, the labs all got together at one point and decided that we don't want to wait for the CCC to make changes. It was too slow. And so we were going to do our own internal study of, we'll get pre-rolls, we'll homogenize them all together, we'll submit samples to all the different labs, and then we'll compare results. And I think maybe 6 labs participated in that. And of course, they're self-selecting. And so I was really happy that the groupings were pretty tight. There were a couple outliers, but for the most part, I think the variability was within reason. Um, and so that was a nice thing. We could do a lot more of that, especially for microbial testing. We haven't done any of that yet, but sharing samples across labs and making sure we're all getting the same results. I'd love to see those kind of efforts be spearheaded by the CCC and not have to be on us to pay for and take our time and organize. And we had a third party person who was unbiased, really like administering the whole thing. And the CCC should be doing all of that.
Do you think that they have, and when I say they, I mean the CCC, do they have, do they know the difference between PCR and plate test in
I
your
think
professional
I think they're
opinion?
getting there. The last time they visited, they asked really deep questions about our technologies, and then they called the vendors of those technologies to ask any questions that we couldn't answer. I think right now they are doing their homework because I think they're planning some changes and they won't tell us what those are. I'm a little
Right.
nervous because they're not really including us in those conversations, but they are definitely doing their homework right now. So I think they've got their eye on this and have realized that this is a really big problem. A lot of the negative press has has pushed them to respond, and I'm optimistic about where we're going. I have to be, otherwise I wouldn't keep doing this. This is insane. But
Yeah.
I am feeling like we're going in the right direction, and I'm not at the place yet where I want to take my ball and go home. I'm still in it. So
No, it's
optimistic.
still way too early in the game, and we got so many things to look forward to,
I
so
am
many players
tired.
guessing.
I am really tired. This is hard, but talking to each other, getting out in person and going to events, those are the things that remind me, all right, stick with it because we're going in good places.
Yeah, I again, going back to like just bare bone basics, right? Like and when you're when I was growing up in India, um, things that your parents tell you, right? They kind of like make up who you are as an adult. And one of the things that as you were saying, I'm just tired. I instantly jumped into my head. Um, it's my papa telling me, just take a break. Don't quit.
Hmm.
Just take a break. You're
Yeah.
gonna come out there.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, to where I think having conversations like these, right? It's very refreshing, especially where you're not a cultivator, but you're still part of the supply chain, and that perspective to anyone listening is very important. Um, and optimism is very contagious. So if you are excited, if you are looking forward to it, then it's very contagious.
Yeah. Right.
I know one story of, and it's a book by Jocko Willink. Have you heard of the
No.
author?
No.
So Jocko Willink is an ex-Navy SEAL. He was on SEAL Team 3, if I remember correctly from his book, and multiple combat tours. And he spoke about essentially like in terms of enthusiasm, right? How enthusiasm and conviction determines the success rate sometimes of an operation. And he was, talking about he now has a consultancy to where he's working with, Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies, and they were talking about how today's generation, in terms of like the labor force, is so difficult. It's very hard to train, like so many problems, right? And he essentially brought it up to the recruiter. This is a big HR company, and they were complaining about the recruitment. He said, "Let me give you a story from history about recruitment. One of the worst, like think about the concept of war. Your life is on the line. You're giving up the most precious years of your formative years in
Hmm.
going for your country. You
Hmm.
will be killed more than likely, or injured, or PTSD. Like that is a big trade-off, right?
Hmm.
Now let's look through history on the Vietnam draft. The Vietnam draft was everybody was against it. Nobody
Hmm.
wanted to fight. They didn't support the cause. They didn't support the mission. They didn't support us being there. Um, and yet, some of the generals um, at the time after, have said like this was the most exciting time for them whenever these recruits came in because they got to essentially um, lead them and change them and transform them. And just their own conviction and their enthusiasm um, was the only determining factor in which platoon had the high retention rate and a high success rate in their operations.
Hmm.
And so yeah, just like how I was talking to Peyton earlier, and she was talking about anxiety in the movie. The if I think it's it too, right? Where in the children's movie, you know what I'm talking about, where you have different emotions.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Inside Out.
Inside Out, yes, Inside
Yeah.
Out. That's it's not if is a different movie. Inside Out, yeah, Inside Out too, and how anxiety takes control, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think it's very similar to where it's like if courage and like confidence like takes over,
Hmm.
uh, that can also be very,
Yeah.
very, infectious. And
Yeah.
so now it's very refreshing to hear, that you are focusing despite, so many things going on. I wanted to ask you on, you built a pretty strong team and you're saying that, you're focusing, prioritizing ethics, right? um, how do you cultivate a culture of like integrity in an industry that very much so rewards, cutting corners?
Yeah. Yeah. It we cannot let anything slip. We have to lead by example. And the second we compromise on one thing, it opens the floodgates for everyone down the chain to compromise. And so it means being a stickler for things, even when they don't matter, or even when they have really dire consequences. It means always doing the right thing every single time and having communication in both directions so that I can welcome feedback from everybody as well. And that if there are things that we could be doing or someone doesn't agree with the way we're doing something, that everyone in management is on the same page to listen to that and do what we think is right so that everyone here can sleep at night and be proud of what we're doing. And just hope that there are enough clients out there who want the same things and who value that as well, that we can survive. But it has to be led by example. It has to mean no compromises ever. And yeah, just keeping each other in check and having a culture where there are no penalties for admitting to mistakes, owning your mistakes, giving feedback about any little thing ever. It's at SafeTiva, it's a pretty small lab team. There are about 15 of us total. And then we have other staff as well, but the lab team is small enough that they know each other really well and are very comfortable. And we don't have a super hierarchical system where they have to, work their way up the chain. I work here every day and my door is open. Same with our COO. We're in the trenches with them, and I think that culture, being able to go get beers after work or whatever, really helps it so that even those in their early career feel like they can speak up at any time too.
Got it. So a little bit more so on the retailer side now, since cultivators sell to the retailers. What questions should retailers be asking to their cultivators?
They should learn how to read a COA. They should get the COA. The certificate of analysis gives them all the testing data. They should look at it carefully. They should look at what lab tested it. They should make sure that all the information they need is there. And then make sure that the bud tenders are educated as well on what a COA is, what data it gives, that consumers could be asking for it. There are a lot of, this is kind of a little bit off topic from your question, but there were a lot of testing changes in the spring that the CCC implemented, and there wasn't a lot of education, and most bud tenders I ask aren't even aware that it happened. So they changed the rules. Sorry.
Yeah, what was it before? What was the testing standards before? And what was the change, and what are they now?
Yeah. So before, when flower came into the lab, we would measure the moisture of that flower first, and then we would test for cannabinoids, and we would correct the cannabinoid numbers for if it were a 0% moisture. So we were removing the weight of the water from the total sample weight in the calculation of the percentage of cannabinoids. And the effect that it had is it normalized, every lab was doing it the same way, and every producer was held to the same standards. No matter how dry or wet their flower was, they'd get the same results. But it also meant that the cannabinoids had higher numbers than what consumers were actually smoking. And there's a lot of debate about whether it's the right thing to do. I just want the labs to be doing the same thing. So after the CCC change, now we test it however it comes into our building. And we still measure moisture, but it's not a part of the cannabinoid calculation anymore. The other thing they changed is previously there was no guidance on what the calculation for total THC or total CBD was. And now they have defined what that calculation is. And it takes into account the decarboxylation of THCA into Delta 9. So there's a 0.877% conversion. So that is lowering the total THC number by 13%. So both of those things had additive effects, so that now the potency, especially the THC numbers, are a lot lower, significantly lower than where they were pre-April. And I don't think retailers or consumers had any idea that April marked when things were high testing versus low testing. Anything that was still on the shelves is still, the original test results are still valid. But so we're seeing this shift now where numbers are all dropping. And according to the comments on Reddit and LinkedIn and in real life, people are saying, man, my favorite brand, they used to have these bangers of 35 percenters, and their quality's just gone way down, and I haven't seen anything over 30 from them in 6 months, and I don't know what's happening over there. They don't realize it's the exact same products. Nothing changed, just the way we do the testing. And
Right.
And so there's this information flow that isn't happening, and it's impacting our industry in really big ways. And travelers who are coming from out of town aren't used to the changes. Massachusetts residents are now trying to go out of state to get flower, especially because they think they'll get higher testing products out there. And
I realize that's just the test.
it's the same thing. It's just the way it's just what we call total THC is different. There's still no guidance on what TAC is and what TAC means. Is it total active cannabinoids? Is it total available cannabinoids? Is it just a sum of all the cannabinoids? Which cannabinoids are we even testing? There's really no standardization on what TAC means, and that's still another one that is really a number on the label that everyone is looking at, but there's no agreement about what that number means. So I just, I wish that retailers and consumers could have the same access to the conversations that are happening about testing on the other side of the industry, and that there was more crossover and communication there.
Yeah, I am just trying to think in my head, or trying to figure out how can you have growth when there is no consensus on what the definition of TAC means. Right. Like that is nuanced, and we do not agree. It's just like I feel like the cannabis industry is very much so. Have you seen the movie Don't Look Up?
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah. Yes.
Where it's we're not in agreement. Right. It's like, and this is a very small example. I mean, that movie I think did a great job at just hyperbolizing the entire thing, but it very similarly, I feel like
yeah, exactly.
Well, what advice would you give? You from the inception to present day, you seem to have stuck to your values and ethics. What advice would you give someone who's starting out in the cannabis industry, either in science or actually the business component of it in any market, on staying true to their values? And it can be anybody from the supply chain of the cultivator, right, all the way down to the retailer that's buying the product, right? And
I think we all need to look at, where are we trying to go? Where do we hope to be in 5 years, and try to operate on the understanding that we're going to be held to higher standards. If we want federal legalization, if we want complete descheduling, there are going to be stricter standards coming, and we all need to prepare for that now if we're going to survive long term. And also that reputation in this industry is everything. And so if consumers are online or they're sharing ideas anywhere and they're saying that they got a moldy product, or that that flower can't possibly be whatever percentage was labeled, if there's a perception that quality has gone downhill or that quality control isn't happening, that's your whole brand's reputation. And so while there are short-term shortcuts for making the quick dollar, and I get it, sometimes people need to do that just to survive till tomorrow. But the brands that are really going to outlast everything, the employees who are going to stay in the industry longest, are those who are keeping a mindset on where we're going and working every day on making sure that our own individual practices are up to those standards now. There are days of reckoning coming, and we're seeing slowly as news gets out about different brands and different labs and the products and the different individuals that it all comes out in the wash in the end, and there is reckoning that happens, and you need to have a clean record in this industry. We're already fighting against the perception from the outside world that we are criminals doing criminal activity and we're all drug dealers, and right, so we need to be professional in everything that we do in order to fight against that and just stay alive, and not just continue being here, but actually thrive.
Right. I think even the operators themselves are untangling a lot of programming that prohibition did, right? And how
Yeah.
we should be operating, right, within this space. And I think pride is one thing that is greatly missing from the cannabis industry. People are still like very fearful. But Megan, this has been a very insightful conversation. Before we wrap, I would like to ask you a question from someone who left a question for you. What is a good quote that you live by?
Oh God. I'm not a quote person, and part of it is I don't know. I'm not a quote person. I don't know how to articulate it. It's
What? Well, let's amend
Oh,
it.
I can give you one. I have, because I just said I'm not a quote person, and then I have one on my wall. I don't know if you can see up there. It says, "What's the best that could happen?" And what's the best that could happen? And it's something that we say around here because so often we're focused on everything that's wrong and trying to just fix problems, or someone will bring ideas to the table and they get shut down so quickly because we think about what's the worst that could happen. And that's my daily reminder to myself to really be thinking about what is the best that could happen? Where could this actually be going? What can we create if we had no boundaries? And yeah, maybe it's a little pie in the sky, and maybe that's why I'm not a quote person, because I'm always like, oh, just be realistic. I'm definitely not one of those people who are like good vibes only. I like to keep it real. I like to have people around me who we can all feel safe to vent with, who can go through the daily struggles and be messy together. I really value having friendships, especially in the industry, of people where we can just be messy and not have these ideals and have to be so held to specific standards and not falter at all.
Right.
So.
Yeah. No, that's still definitely a good quote. I'll share one from a professor that I had that was very impactful in my in undergrad, and he always used to say, um, "Try is a word with no power," and for some reason that's always stuck with me.
Yeah. How
Yeah.
very Yoda.
Yeah, he was very young. He was, I wouldn't call him, I wouldn't call him Yoda. He was this 6'3", gay black man who was, as he would walk, I mean, just the way he would walk, he had such a, swagger about him, and so
Nice.
intellectual and so empathetic.
Yeah.
Um, he could basically like, it was a very small class, and as we would all be coming in, he would just be looking at us, and he could tell instantly, like, okay, something's happening at the house, something's with the relationship,
Yeah.
something's happening
Yeah.
here. And he was, very, very, very intellectual, very intellectual. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, try is a word with no power.
Yeah.
Always stuck with me.
Yeah. I think I do have a lot of sayings, but I don't have a favorite quote right now. I'm trying not to be idealistic about things and make space for the messiness of it all. And, it's okay to fail and just enjoying the human experience of the craziness.
Yeah, again, talking to Peyton earlier, the quote or one of the other quotes that came out of this was fail fast and fail cheap.
Ah, yeah. There you go. That's a very good entrepreneurial standard to live by.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Megan, thank you so much. For everyone listening, where can they find more information about SafeTiva Labs and learn more about cannabis testing in general?
Yeah, so safetiva.com is our website, and trying to keep up with the blog there, but I post on LinkedIn most often my thoughts and interpretations of what's going on. So my LinkedIn page, Megan Dobro, is where I post a lot, and and our Instagram at SafeTiva Labs. Those are all good places to find info. And I really love engaging about this stuff. So I welcome anyone to reach out and connect with me and have a conversation. And communication is what it's all about. And so I like talking to everybody. So I welcome anyone to reach out.
That's awesome, Megan.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.